As we approach the next millennium, the issue of Caribbean integration has become most urgent. Today, we focus on that very issue, Caribbean integration. We will have a conversation with the Secretary General of CARICOM, Mr. Edwin Carrington. Don't go anywhere. CaribNation is up next. Welcome to CaribNation. My name is David Hinds. From the time of the Federation in 1958 to 1962, through CARIFTA and presently CARICOM, the issue of Caribbean integration has been a persistent one. Should the Caribbean be integrated politically and economically, or should it be integrated politically and not economically? These issues have come up from time to time. And of course, a number of thinkers have spent a lot of time on it. Today on CaribNation, we want to delve into the whole issue of Caribbean integration. And we have with us in the studio none other than the Secretary General of CARICOM, Mr. Edwin Carrington. Mr. Secretary, welcome to CaribNation.
Thank you very much, David.
To a lot of people out there, the term or word CARICOM is just that, a term or a word. I want us today to bring CARICOM into the minds of Caribbean people and the friends of Caribbean, of course, people who are from other regions of the world. Simply, what is CARICOM?
Well, the word CARICOM is short for Caribbean Community and Common Market. In all these organizations, you have an acronym which is drawn from the official name, CARICOM, Caribbean Community and Common Market. It is used in place of Caribbean Community and Common Market. Sometimes it is used in place of just the common market, sometimes in place of the community. It's more or less the same. The coming together of all the English-speaking countries of the Caribbean, plus recently Suriname and now Haiti, to form a united grouping of sovereign independent states, with one exception, Montserrat, who are pursuing economic integration, coordination of their foreign policies, and what we call functional cooperation. That's cooperation in areas like health, education, women and development among themselves.
CARICOM came into existence in 1973 with the Treaty of Chaguaramas.
That's right.
That was signed by I think, 4 prime ministers.
That's right. The Prime Minister of Barbados, the then Prime Minister of Barbados, Guyana, the President, Prime Minister of Jamaica, and the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago.
And of course, the forerunner to that was CARIFTA. And if we go back, we get into the British West Indies Federation.
Absolutely.
But let's deal with CARICOM because it's important. This year is your 25th anniversary.
Absolutely. We are celebrating our Silver Jubilee this year.
Mr. Secretary, CARICOM has come in for a lot of criticisms from commentators of all kinds in the Caribbean. Some people think that the integration process has been too slow. They think that the CARICOM Secretariat is a waste of time. In fact, I remember the Black Stallion singing a famous calypso in 1979 called Caribbean Man, in which he talked about these meetings that they hold in the Caribbean, and yet we can't have Caribbean integration. As you look back over these 25 years, make an assessment of CARICOM, some of the strides it has made, and also some of the difficulties it has had.
Well, it's very interesting when you listen to various commentators. Depending on what time and at what place and what event, you get a different evaluation. For example, right now, just to give you an example, faced with the political situation in Guyana, in which CARICOM has intervened and through the Herdmanston Accord has been able to hold the situation from deteriorating, the headline would be, hats off to CARICOM. The end of the Lomé negotiations in 1975, when we got the first Lomé Convention and got special arrangement for sugar, banana, rice, rum, and so forth, it was hail CARICOM. when we did not perform that solidly in the choice of the Secretary General of the OAS some years ago, because there was a split in the region, is, oh good Lord, what is this CARICOM about? So you know people, you have to understand them to know what they mean. What I will say to you, there's no one now who would say they'd rather be without CARICOM than with CARICOM. Now, what are some of the achievements and some of the pitfalls that we have encountered over the years? First of all, you must bear in mind that CARICOM is an association of independent sovereign states. Except in the case of Montserrat, which is a bit of a historical aberration, all the member states of CARICOM are independent sovereign states. That means that there's no supranational structures within CARICOM which can impose decisions or actions on the member states, as you have, for example, in the European Community, where you have a commission with that of power. Therefore, it means that every step of the way, member states have got to take the relevant decisions, agree to implement them, and in fact implement them. And if they do not, you have no supranational sanctions you can impose. One man said it's like being asked to marry your wife over every day. I said some days he might just not do it. And now it is that need for continuous voluntary will to pursue the particular line of action that is really the true test of the CARICOM survival. What has it done over the years? I would say the first thing I would put down as credit, and bear in mind, as you rightly said, we are coming in the wake of the breakup of the Federation when the country seems to have gone their separate ways, is that we have now developed a culture of working together. There is an expectation, there is a demand, not only by the government, but by the people, that we should work together on the various issues confronting the lives of the peoples of the region. As an issue emerges, people say, well, what is CARICOM doing? Because they expect CARICOM to work together to resolve the issues. That expectation itself indicates to you what their evaluation of the institution is. That's the first point. It has also provided significant economic sustenance, bread and butter for the lives of people. The intra-regional trade, that's the trade between CARICOM among the member states, is now 99% free. No charges, no duties, no quantitative restrictions, no quotas. You can produce a good in any country and sell in another country with no fear of duties or any other restriction on it, thereby providing you with a market outlet which you could not have if you didn't have CARICOM. You'd be limited to your own national market, or in the case of entering other markets, you having to pay the duty and whatever quantitative restrictions there are. But it's not just the intra-CARICOM market that has been provided by CARICOM. CARICOM, by joining together at first among themselves and then with other countries, entered into negotiations in a various number of theaters in Europe, in the United States, in Canada. We have been able to negotiate in Europe as part of what is called the African, Caribbean, and Pacific Group of States, which comprises 71 countries now, 15 from the Caribbean, 47 from Africa, and 8 from the Pacific. We have been able to negotiate and renegotiate what is called the Lomé Convention. That convention with the European Union, which are the 15 European countries now, including Germany and England and Netherlands and France and Italy and Belgium and Spain and Portugal and so on, we have been able to negotiate a trade and aid agreement. Under that trade agreement, the trade aspect, it provides preferential treatment for our sugar, our bananas, our rum, our rice. It provides aid at the largest aid source for the countries that comprise the ACP, more aid than we get from any other source. Now, those negotiations took place with CARICOM as a bloc.
Mr. Secretary, you obviously hit the nail on the head there when you talk about intra-regional trade and, of course, trade between the region and the rest of the world. Let me just take you off from some of the achievement and let's talk a little bit about this economic integration, because it seems to me that that is the bedrock on which Caribbean integration, certainly in this period, rests on. You have challenged yourself to create a single market economy in the Caribbean by the year 2000, by the end of 1999.
Yes.
And of course, you've begun to make some strides in that area. You mentioned the free movement of goods and so forth. Let's examine some of the other aspects of that single market economy. Let's start with the movement of labor.
Fine. But the single market and economy is to be an upgraded version of what CARICOM is now.
Okay.
Right now, it's a common market, and really that deals more with production, how you move production.
Okay.
What we are saying is that before you can even get to production, we have to look at how you move the factors that go into production: labor, capital, technology, and so forth. How you remove obstacles and barriers to their movement so that they can move to the point where they provide the greatest production and productivity. The movement of goods is the end product, what you make. And that has been so since CARIFTA, which preceded CARICOM.
Right.
We are now moving to free movement of services. How do you provide services? Services are now a critical part of any economic activity. The free movement of services is now to be provided for by a protocol which has been signed last year, and which provides for the free movement of services, the right of establishment, and the movement of capital. You have to be able to move capital if you want to invest. If you're in Guyana and you want to set up a business in St. Lucia, you must be able to move your capital, your investment capital from Guyana, invest it in St. Lucia. And the right of establishment means that you will be treated in St. Lucia just as another St. Lucian company. There will be nothing against you as a foreign company. You'll be treated as though you are St. Lucian. And if you want to supply from your head office in Guyana technicians to do the work in the company in St. Lucia, you must have the capacity to do that freely. And that is the provision of services. Or if I'm a dentist and I'm at Trinidad and I want to open a clinic in Jamaica, I should be able to do that freely. That is now being provided for. The heads of government have taken a decision that they will begin to provide for graduates as the first category, university graduates, as the first category of skilled persons. They recognize that graduates are not the only and sometimes the most skilled people, but they started somewhere. And we are having now some feeding problems with some cases where the spirit of the agreement is not fully observed. But the general principle is there and it's now moving. And to assist the movement of skills, they have also agreed to the movement of termination benefits, so that if you work for 10 years in one country and then move to another, you do not lose your benefits that you earned in the first country. You take those 10 years service along with you into the new enterprise. That provides the kind of lubrication to the process of free movement of skills. In the case of movement of capital, the provision is now being put into place, and it is relatively easy between certain countries, those that have fixed currencies, because the exchange rate of money is serious, is determined and clear. Where you have floating currencies, of course, you have a little more difficulty. But we are moving in all these areas, recognizing full well that unless you remove the obstacles to the movement of the factors of production, the level and efficiency of your production is going to be down, and you will not be able to compete in today's world, which is removing all trade barriers.
And of course, even as you mention the protocol and the fact that it was signed at the heads of government conference, the individual countries must now implement these points. Of course, recently Jamaica and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I think, implemented the movement of skilled labor. But some of the other countries are still to enact.
I think all the countries have passed the legislation or have taken the legislation to the parliament. Mm-hmm. Some have actually passed it and enacted it. It's been promulgated. Some cases have been passed but not yet promulgated. And in some cases, I think it is still in the parliament. We are urging them to push forward with this, because this is an undertaking given many years ago and should really by now have been enforced in all countries in its fullness.
You mentioned the issue of currency just now, and of course, the common currency idea has been floated for a very long time. Talk about what are some of the obstacles towards creating a common currency in the Caribbean, and also talk about the advantages of having a common currency.
Yes. Well, the difficulties in arriving at a common currency are great. Let's just take an example of the European Union, which started with the Treaty of Rome in 1957. Mm-hmm. We are now in 1998, and they are now moving into a single currency, the euro. Mm-hmm. They are now, and not all member states in the European Union. It is not an easy step. It is a very advanced step of integration. But we have certain advantages in the Caribbean. 7 of our countries, the OECS countries, have a single currency, this Caribbean dollar.
Right.
And then you have Barbados with a fixed exchange rate currency, so that the exchange rate between the Barbados dollar and the East Caribbean is pretty fixed. One is 2.7 to the dollar, the other is 2 to the dollar, and that is fixed.
You mean the US dollar?
The US dollar.
Right.
And they can, therefore, the exchange rate between Barbados and the East Caribbean will be 2 to 2.7.
Right.
And that is fixed for the small commission. The real difficulty begins to come when you get to floating currencies, which Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, Guyana. Those currencies are floating from day to day. And though they, from time to time, are stable, they are not fixed.
Okay.
And that does create a greater risk for those doing transactions in those currencies. That is one aspect of it, the convertibility question and the rate of convertibility. But it's not the only problem in arriving at a single currency. A single currency is going to need a single monetary authority.
Exactly.
You can't have 3 different authorities or 12 different authorities determining the exchange rate of a currency or managing the currency. That means that the region, all the sovereign states, will have to agree to establish a single monetary authority. And that is a great difficulty. Now, advantages, quickly. One of the great advantages of a single currency is what we call the transaction benefits. I'll give you an example of what happened in Europe. There was an experiment undertaken where someone, I think in the United Kingdom, took £1,000 and bought all the currencies one after the other in the European Union. They bought Belgian francs, then they went to Italian lira, German Deutschmark, French francs, pesos from Portugal, just changing the £100 right away. And they started with £1,000, and they ended up with £600. Just the transaction cost of that. Now, if you have a single currency, transaction costs go. I could go from one country to the other, and I spend the currency. I don't have any transaction cost. So it makes for more efficiency, more certainty. Now I have in my home a large amount of dollars from this country or from that country, which I can't spend when I get back home because they don't accept that currency, or they accept it at such a low rate of a discount, such a high rate of discount, I should say, that is not worth it. If you had a single currency, all that waste in transaction goes. So transaction cost, certainty, and ease of transaction and travel are some of the great benefits you can get from a single currency.
What is the mindset of the politicians, the decision makers in the region on this issue?
I would say at this stage, everyone recognizes the difficulty of getting to a single currency, and they're more concerned with getting to what we may call fixed or stable exchange rates between the various currencies. We feel if we can get to that stage, that would be a first step towards moving to a single currency.
Let's get back to the whole question of intra-regional trade, because that has been a sore point. We know that individual Caribbean countries have tended to trade a lot with, let's say, the United States of America, and in comparison, inter-regional trade has lagged behind. What is the state of inter-regional trade at the moment?
Well, on this one, I think there's always I have found that there's a misunderstanding of the whole issue. If you take any developing country and you look at its trade pattern, you find the bulk of its export goes to a developed country and the bulk of its imports come from a developed country. Why? Because the diversification of production which you need for your consumption and investment, you do not find in other developing countries. And the structure of your production, diversified production you find in developed countries, you do not find in a developing country. More developing countries are either monoculture or monoeconomy, bananas or sugar and bananas, but very narrow production structure, very narrow. They do not produce motor cars, bicycles, cameras, watches, shoes. That's very few. Therefore, if you put two developing countries to trade one against the other, there's very little to trade between them. And therefore, to the extent that the CARICOM economies are small and to a certain extent underdeveloped, the capacity for trade between them is limited by that factor. But their trade with the United States, you'll find their exports are few products and their imports a large variety of products. And therefore, you find the trade between developed and developing countries much larger than the trade among developing countries. Bring that down now into CARICOM. You find therefore the intra-CARICOM trade is about 10 to 15% of their trade, but the rest of their trade is in the developed world. But as those economies grow and develop, you'll find the intra-regional trade expanding as a share of total trade. I think many people do not understand this and therefore attribute to the small intra-regional trade the wrong conclusion.
Of course, you talked about the new regime in terms of moving the Caribbean towards a single market economy. It called for some kind of structural change at the CARICOM Secretariat. We'll touch on that when we come back because we have to take a short break. Don't go anywhere. Carib Nation will be right back. In case you're just joining us, today we're having a conversation with the Secretary General of the Caribbean Community and Common Market, CARICOM. Mr. Secretary, you have practically grown up with CARICOM. You worked there in the 1970s and you've been Secretary General for the last 6 years. And so you're best placed, I think, to speak on the issues that we're discussing today. Let's talk about some changes there at the Secretariat. Of course, the changes you mentioned in the first segment of the program in terms of moving towards a common market, a single market, must be accompanied by some changes at the Secretariat. And in order to do so, you have had to amend the Chaguaramas Treaty that established CARICOM. And you did so in something you call the first protocol, protocol number 1. Talk a little bit about what that protocol entails and how it has kind of changed the structure of the Secretariat to make it more effective in this period.
Yes. Well, as you know, the Secretariat is the administrative organ of the community, and therefore must service the community and be designed in a way to best serve the community. The community is not only about economics, it's also about human and social development. It's about foreign policy coordination. It's about preserving democracy. It's about dealing with disaster management. So the Secretariat has to be designed in that manner. We have in the structure of the Secretariat at the present time 3 broad directorates. The Directorate for Regional Trade and Economic Integration, the Directorate for Foreign and Community Relations, and the Directorate for Human and Social Development. In addition to those, you have the Office of the Secretary General and the Deputy Secretary General and the Legal Services. That's the sort of, we have tried to keep it simple yet comprehensive. Now, within each of these broad directorates, and each directorate is headed by an Assistant Secretary General, within these broad directorates you have various sections dealing with the various aspects that fall within those directorates. We have, I would think, so far been able to monitor as well as lead in the work of the community in the various areas under. But you're quite right. The capacity of the Secretariat needs to be reinforced as we move into these new areas. External relations. We've just coming from the Summit of the Americas, the second meeting of the Summit of the Americas. That is going to lead to a tremendous area of work for which the Secretariat would have to be assisting member states. We have recognized this and have proposed a new structure to assist the Secretariat, a specialized structure called the Regional Negotiating Machinery, which has been now established, running for 1 year, just about getting all the teething problems out. And that machinery is an adjunct to the Secretariat to pursue the negotiations in both the Summit of the America area as well as in the Lomé area. Within the Secretariat itself, simpliciter, we need more capacity to service the arrangements which we have just negotiated with the United States, for example, the Partnership on Prosperity and Security, which was signed with President Clinton last year. And that has set up its own structure for cooperation between the United States and the CARICOM. It covers economics, it covers drugs, it covers justice, security issues. We need to strengthen the Secretariat in that regard. In the area of the preserving democracy, the problems in Haiti remain. They are not finished. Problems are emerging within the CARICOM itself without taking into Haiti. The problem in Guyana, the problem in St. Kitts Nevis. People are calling for maybe an electoral advisory bureau or electoral advisory dimension of the Secretariat. That is something we need to look at. But resources are a limiting factor. Mm-hmm. And we now are engaged in a strategic plan of the Secretariat to see how we can trim it and yet improve its capacity. It is quite a magical juggling act, but it is the kind of exercise that we have got to form to make sure that the Secretariat is capable of delivering the kind of technical and administrative services which the community needs. And talking of administrative services, we have over 150 meetings a year. And at the same time, not be too great a burden on the pockets of the member states.
Let's talk about the relationship between the Secretariat and the decision makers, meaning the heads of government. I know previously that the heads of government summit as the highest decision-making body in the region was burdened with a lot of issues. And I think recently a new structure was put in place at the level of the Council of Ministers, or what used to be the Council of Ministers, now to deal with some of those issues. Can you speak a little bit on that?
Yes, well, the structure which has emerged from the Protocol 1, which you asked about earlier, now has a design which we hope would deal with this problem of overburdening of the agendas of the heads of government. Heads of government conference, which is the supreme decision-making body, ought to be preoccupied with broad areas of policy and strategy and not with details. They must be able to see the wood for the trees. But it's so many issues were coming on the CARICOM agenda that there was a great difficulty for the heads to wade through all of these. Even when we had special meetings to deal with special issues, others intruded on it. So the heads have agreed, they have established, in fact, in the Protocol 1, what is called the Community Council of Ministers. This is a council which occupies the second highest rank in the structure of the community's organs of management and governance. It is made up of a minister from each CARICOM country who is responsible in his country for CARICOM matters. A special minister is designated in each country to manage CARICOM matters, to see that things that CARICOM are followed up, organized, coordinated, and prepared, ready for the meeting. Now, those ministers, when brought together, constitute the Caribbean Community Council of Ministers, and they're the second highest body, and among the functions they perform is to take decisions on a number of areas that previously went to the heads of government. Also, they prepare the meetings of the heads of government, the agenda, ensure that the agendas are kept within reasonable limits. The body is new, I should stress.
Right.
They have had only one meeting. They're having the second meeting in the middle of May. But that is the intention of the body, and we will have to wait to see how well it works. They, among other things, will be approving the budget of the Secretariat.
And of course, you mentioned earlier the negotiating committee, which is headed by Sir Sridhar Ramphal, who was a Secretary of the Commonwealth at one point and former Foreign Minister in Guyana. How has that been working?
Well, that has had 1 year now in existence, just about. There are some teething problems because of location, among other things. So Sridhar is based in London. Some of the technical people are based in Barbados, in Guyana. And, the telecommunication links are not as easy. But by and large, I would say it has so far been encouraging. But there's a lot to do still.
And you mentioned earlier on the successful negotiation of the Lomé Convention in 1975. Ever since then, there's been tremendous changes in the whole world situation. And of course, the banana preferential treatment that we got for banana and sugar and so forth. Banana in particular has come under serious assault recently. Everybody, of course, by now would know about the banana issue. Let's discuss that issue for a moment and try to figure out how is it CARICOM has intervened and whether you see any resolution to the problem. First of all, give us a background to the whole banana issue.
Well, when we said that we negotiated Lomé in 1975, that was the first Lomé Convention.
Okay.
But we've had a Lomé 2, Lomé 3, and Lomé 4.
Right.
And even in Lomé 4, there has been a midterm review. And those took place in 75 for the first, 79, 84, and 89, and the midterm review 2 years ago. The bananas, like sugar, were two of the major commodities for which the Lomé arrangements had to cater. And it wasn't just Caribbean bananas. It was bananas from the ACP. So while you had St. Lucia, Dominica, Jamaica, Belize, Grenada, you also had as major banana suppliers the Cameroons and Ivory Coast, and in those days Somalia. That protocol became an important part of the arrangement because it provided for a special market treatment for ACP bananas, which was not extended to bananas to countries outside of the ACP group. Those bananas outside of the ACP group had to pay a certain tariff from which the ACP bananas were exempted, and the tariff was quite penalty, a great penalty, very, very high. Also, there were quotas on what they were able to supply. So there was both a tariff and quota limitations. That was to make sure that the price of bananas in the European market was such that it permitted the ACP bananas to fetch a reasonable price on those markets. This was necessary because many of the ACP producers, the small islands of the Caribbean in particular, were high-cost producers. Many of them might forget that at the end of the war, the Second World War, bananas was introduced into the Windward Islands of the Caribbean by the United Kingdom as a dollar shortage measure. It was done for sterling area benefit. Now, we are opening up the the markets all over the world, and these bananas grown on hillsides, grown on very difficult topography, but yet grown under high social conditions with labor union conditions, have to compete with bananas grown in Latin and Central America in massive haciendas in very, very much poorer social conditions, much lower wage and other social factors have to be taken into account. And now we are asked to compete with those bananas in an open market. Could not, without the protocol. And the challenge which the United States initiated, assisted by Mexico and a few others, on the European Union Banana Protocol, in the context of the new world trading regime created by the World Trade Organization, found that the mechanisms used to implement the protocol were in contradiction to the provisions of the World Trade Organization. And they have asked that these be dismantled and new arrangements be put in place. The reality is, we had found, and neither we nor the Americans have been able to come forward with a mechanism which would replace the present one, which would achieve the objective of protecting our bananas in the market, which would at the same time not run counter to the World Trade Organization provisions. And if our fear, and it's not a fear that is unjustified, it is quite clear, that if the World Trade Organization arrangements are put in place, it will be short order that the Caribbean banana industry will be decimated.
Yes, and of course there have been calls for diversification as a means of overcoming that problem if and when it arises. Do you share that view?
Yes, we all agree. We all support the idea of diversification. But there are a couple of comments on that. There's diversification away from a product and diversification around the product. We are saying we need to diversify around bananas. That is, you do not just produce and sell bananas as a ripe product. You sell bananas, some as ripe product, some as banana powder, some as twine from the stems of the banana tree, some as puri for a host of other products. But to get there, you have, first of all, have the investment, you have to have the technology, you have to have the capital, you have to have the skill, you have to have the markets, and you also have to have the time. There is no diversification overnight. There is no diversification on the cheap. Anybody who tells you that is trying to fool you. And what we are saying is we need the investment, we need the technology, we need the policy support, we need the market support. So diversification, yes, but all these elements have to go into the package to make diversification. And then training. I think of a farmer at home bringing his banana out to his donkey. He knows nothing about new technology and so forth. For me, he's been a boy. He's grown up planting bananas the way his father did. He's learned a bit about some fertilizer over the years. Now you're trying to convert him into an industrial producer. It does not come overnight in any country. Certainly not in ours and certainly not anywhere else.
In addition to the banana issue, certainly another issue has been the issue of NAFTA and the Caribbean's quest for NAFTA parity, which has been dealt a severe blow in the Congress here last year. Where are we at the moment on the issue of NAFTA parity? And is the Caribbean, what is your strategy in terms of what you're asking for? Are you asking for parity with Mexico, along with preferential treatment? Because of course, the Caribbean economies cannot compete with Mexico, even if there is parity in terms of getting into the U.S. market. What is your strategy vis-a-vis that?
Well, the first point is this was a central issue in our negotiations with President Clinton last year. And it's written into the partnership agreement. But he did say that in putting forward the legislation to Congress, he could not guarantee its passage.
Right.
We do have some difficulty as to whether enough effort was made to see that it was passed. We know it was rejected. The concern we have is you shouldn't just put it forward. You must put it forward and fight for it. We are not so sure how much of a fight there was to get it passed, but we know it was rejected. The question then is, what more can we do to get this thing back on stream? Not much. We can lobby. We have been talking and discussing in certain areas, but I don't think we have been lobbying enough. That's my own view. We have met with the Secretary of State recently, and we have again put the issue forward. We have been working with the European Union to see how the new regime that they are putting in place, to what extent it can control damage limitation, damage control. But at the end of the day, the matter is not primarily in our hands. You can make your case, you can plead, you can push, but we have no control over the United States Congress, and we have no control over the World Trade Organization. So as small countries, we are really getting the short end of the stick.
Comment a little bit on the issue of preference within the context of NAFTA parity.
Well, we enjoy what we call the Caribbean Basin Initiative treatment, along with the Central Americans and a few other countries in the United States market. And that benefit is critical to our exports to those markets. But as you move to NAFTA, the treatment extended to NAFTA partners is equal to, and in some cases better than, that extended on the CBI. So that, let's take textiles. There is no doubt that there's a significant switch of investment away from the Caribbean to Mexico. And you can see it in the investment figures, you see it in the employment figures, and therefore you see it in the production and export figures. The first step for us is to at least be put on par. And we'll work on the preference, on the efficiency side, the competitiveness side. There are some areas in which we can compete if we are put on a level playing field. Unfortunately, there aren't many areas in which we are on a level playing field with those suppliers. And this is what is so unfortunate. The people try to confirm, to insist that what we need is preference in every area. In some areas, we are prepared and able to compete if given a level playing field. And we like to have those areas exploited first.
A decision was taken recently to implement or to set up a Caribbean free trade of the, free trade of the Americas.
Yes.
And that is supposed to come on stream by 2005, and the Caribbean obviously must have a big stake in that.
That's right.
Please comment on what you're doing to pursue that the free trade of the Americas and the Caribbean's role in it.
Yes. Well, first of all, we've been very active in the preparatory work. In all the working groups, we have been very active. We have also been taking part in the vice ministerial, and the summit meetings. In fact, I'm on my way back from the meeting in Chile, among one of a Caribbean delegation, which I would show numbered nearly 100 when you added all the member states. All the heads of government except 2 were there and made their voices heard very strongly. Our main concern is that if you are bringing together economies of the size of those in North America and those in the Caribbean, some of those in South America to Brazil,
All right.
you are bringing together an integration grouping with the greatest diversity in the world in terms of size and levels of economic development. Not even the European Union, which has Luxembourg as against Germany, or Ireland as against Italy or France, has as wide a diversity in size and level of economic development as you'll find between the United States and, say, St. Kitts and Nevis. 275 million against, 60,000 people. Levels of economic activity, the size of population, and so forth. We will be having the largest possible diversity among the member states of the 34 or 35 member states if Cuba gets in. Now, we are saying that in that context, peculiar considerations relating to the smaller economies must be upfront. When we met in Miami in the first summit in 1994, they did admit that the forging of a free trade area of the Americas would be a complex problem due to the differences in the levels and sizes of economies of the region, and that they will bear this in mind in constructing the free trade area. We are saying now, let us bear it in mind in the following ways. And we have put forward a number of proposals. One of them, which emerged from the distinguished former president of Guyana, was the establishment of a regional integration fund. What we are saying, both theory and practice has demonstrated that if you bring a large economy developed and a small developing economy together in an integration process, the process of polarization will draw the economic activities, the investment, trade, the production to the larger and more developed, rendering the smaller withered away. And we are saying for the smaller to take effective part, you have to assist it to improve its infrastructure, to improve its human resources, to allow it to become efficient in being able to exploit certain niche markets in certain areas so that it can hold its own, so it can be highly efficient, small and efficient with the big and competent economies.
And on that note, Mr. Secretary, we'll have to take a short break. And when we come back, we're going to touch on the issue of Cuba. We're going to touch on U.S. CARICOM relations. And we're going to talk a little bit about civil society, given the fact that you recently passed a charter of civil society there in the CARICOM region. Don't go anywhere. Carib Nation, we'll be right back. Mr. Secretary, before we took the break, you had begun to elaborate on the whole issue of
treatment of the small
economies.
Yes, that has to be upfront, and there's a whole package on that we have put forward at the summit, which we hope we've been led to believe will be taken into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
We hope that means adopted. There is one other element that is of great concern to us. Emerging at the summit last week, there was always this point being made that new initiatives will be financed out of existing resources. And that is a cause of worry to us, because those existing resources will have to come from some program or programs that are already being put in place. Now, we are the beneficiaries of many of those programs, and we therefore see this as a likely danger of moving resources from programs which we badly need, scholarships, fellowships, technical assistance, which we need, moving them from there into other programs mean that we, in a sense, are going to be financing the process.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to us, is a serious difficulty.
Mm-hmm. CARICOM-U.S. relations, very important, given the fact that we're in the backyard, so to speak, of the United States of America. The Caribbean region cannot escape the presence of this mighty nation. One of the issues that has characterized Caribbean-U.S. relations, certainly over the last 15 to 20 years, has been the issue of Cuba, where the United States has taken one hardline position towards Cuba, and CARICOM, for reasons of culture and for your own economic development, has taken a conciliatory attitude towards Cuba. In fact, one can go right back to 1973, when the Big Four, Trinidad, Guyana, Jamaica, and Barbados, opened up diplomatic relations with Cuba. Let's talk about the whole issue of Cuba and how CARICOM sees Cuba and the role Cuba must play in terms of the hemisphere.
Well, first of all, we do not accept that we are in anybody's backyard. We believe we have moved from there. We do not like the notion of backyard. As one chap said, if he's any place, he's in the front lawn. But
okay.
The backyard concept is one of the changes of perception that we do not accept. First of all. Secondly, you are right. There has been some differences of position between the Caribbean and the United States with respect to Cuba. You must understand that Cuba is a Caribbean country, the largest. And we believe that the way to approach Cuba is somewhat different from the approach by the United States. I don't think there's a serious difficulty about the ends that we both seek. I think it has to do more with the means we employ. Our heads speak more of constructive engagement and political diversity, and not so much of embargo and exclusion. They do feel that there's need for changes in Cuba, and they have used different language. One phrase being used is post-revolutionary democracy. But they do not believe that the way forward to achieve those changes is the one which has been tried for 30-odd years and has not yet shown any results. The Caribbean is not trying to, as it were, interpose itself between the United States and Cuba to solve the Cuba problem. We do not have that capacity. But we cannot avoid or escape or ignore the fact that Cuba is an important part of our region. As you rightly said, we established diplomatic relations, I tell you, on the 8th of December 1972, that the four countries. We have since established a CARICOM Cuba Commission dealing with trade, technical cooperation, scientific and cultural cooperation. Cuba has just applied for membership of the ACP group. If it does get that membership, which the Caribbean supports the application, it will be part of what will be a 72-nation grouping of developing countries with the 15 members of the European Union in whatever agreement succeeds the Lomé IV agreement, if it succeeds in getting membership. We support the application, and we hope that the injunction of the Pope, which called for the world to be open to Cuba and for Cuba to be open to the world, would be the theme which would carry us forward in this process.
Has Cuba applied to join CARICOM?
No, not as yet.
If it does, what do you think would be the response?
I believe that the region would want to be in a position to treat favorably with an application. I believe there will be conditions, as they are for Haiti, as they were for Suriname. But I believe our countries would, in the same spirit of trying to get Cuba more in. But there will be conditions, I'm sure.
Another big issue in Caribbean-U.S. relations is the whole issue of drugs. And we have had the infamous ship rider agreements being signed, causing a lot of dissent and so on within the Caribbean. There have been some pointing of fingers, I think, sometimes as to whether the Caribbean is doing enough to deal with the drug problem. Is CARICOM involved in that, and to what extent are you involved?
Yes, we are involved. As I said to you, all the problems of the Caribbean they come find a place on the CARICOM agenda.
Mm-hmm.
What you call the ship rider, what we call the maritime cooperation agreements, have been signed between the United States and the Caribbean countries, bilateral agreements.
Right.
That was one of the concerns we had, that many would have preferred one U.S. CARICOM agreement rather than. But as I said to you at the beginning, these are sovereign independent states. Mm-hmm. And CARICOM is an association of sovereign independent states. And joining CARICOM does not remove the sovereignty of any particular state. The matter came up for discussion among the heads with the President of the United States, and a number of areas have been agreed on to deal with this problem of the illicit trafficking drugs and arms trafficking, because for us, the two things go hand in hand. In fact, the arms trafficking reinforces the drug trafficking process and help to create the kind of instability which we have been witnessing in some of our countries. CARICOM is involved as individual nations, as the grouping, and as a secretariat. A good bit of the technical time of some of my staff is spent on dealing with the drug and arms problem.
We have a large number of Caribbean people living in the diaspora here in North America, of course. And you were at a briefing on Capitol Hill organized by an organization called the Institute of Caribbean Studies. And there are a number of other organizations, Caribbean organizations, an interest group here in North America. How do you see those groups playing a role in pushing the integration process on the one hand, and also in facilitating, if you will, access to corridors of power here in the United States?
Well, I see at least three areas in which they can help. You quite rightly identified that of facilitating access to corridors of power, and I would say, and influencing the decisions taken by the various agencies in the countries in which they live and work and operate. That's the first step. The second is there's need for many of them to return home to help. Now, you're not going to get the salaries and conditions you get in North America, but you'll get, we hope, adequate to live. And 5 years of your life for the Caribbean, I think, is not too much to ask of many who have gotten their first start by the early education in the Caribbean region and have their roots there and can make a significant contribution. And I think the third is information and communication. There are many who may not be able to come. There are many who may not have particular influence in decision-making where they are, but they can keep us informed with developments that may be relevant to us. That, believe me, is a very important part of the task. Keeping us informed, information, things that may be relevant to us, saying to us, look, this is happening. What are you doing about this? Asking questions, posing issues. That is as important as the other two. And we appreciate all three and look forward to receiving them.
And on that note, Mr. Secretary, it's been a pleasure talking with you. You've certainly shed a lot of light on the whole issue of Caribbean integration and some of the issues that face our region as we enter the 21st century. Certainly, I'm sure our listeners and viewers will agree that there can be no Caribbean, either as individual countries or as a region, without CARICOM as we know it. So on that note, I want to thank you for tuning in to yet another edition of CaribNation. And please do remember, our motto on this program is one people, one culture, one Caribbean, one nation. Until the next time, stay good.